Hi there, I'm Craig Miles. I'm one of the executive pastors on staff, and we are here with the OverTime Podcast. I had the pleasure of preaching at the Coeur d'Alene campus this week. We have Pat Lessard, who is the marriage and family pastor here at the Post Falls campus, and he preached here in Post Falls. And then we have Jim Blazin, the campus pastor for our North campus, who preached up there at the North. And we are talking about the topic of stewarding our health. And I don't remember us ever taking an entire week's message and talking about this topic. We've talked about it over the years, right? But actually taking an entire week's message and talking about stewarding our health. And we talk about stewarding our finances and our gifts and abilities and our time. But this idea of stewarding our health is, I think, important and sometimes missed in the stewardship conversation. But it's also kind of complex. As you guys were preparing for this message, what were some of the things that you guys were wrestling with, even developing a message that you were planning on preaching?
Well, just briefly on that, it was funny, even in our sermon team, as we're, building this, conversation, I think we had physical health, spiritual health, and mental health on the docket originally. And then you asked the question, what about emotional health? Is that something we should speak into? And then, so as I was going even through that in my own message, so I added that. Then there was like the relational piece of it. It was like the relational health component. I feel like I need to speak to that too. I feel like that'd be missing. So anyways, even just
all
that.
in 35 minutes, right?
Yeah. Even just that conversation has just continued to expand, let alone the complexities of any one of those things.
Right.
Yeah.
It was big.
It was really challenging for me because there's so much there. There's so much information. One of the things I think is important is that we recognize that the emotional and mental challenges that we can have, our health, they are different, and yet they run hand in hand with each other. And so to try to address those two issues as separate issues, one being just your cognitive ability to process thoughts clearly and think through things, and then the other on the emotional side, like how do I effectively manage my emotions? How do I steward what I feel about things? Those are both very challenging for all of us on a given day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the challenges, both in preparing the message and communicating, is we all have different starting points with whatever one of those forms of health we're talking about.
Right.
There are people that are born with physical challenges that a lot of us will never even deal with, right? And that's the same for people's mental health and emotional health. Spiritual health, we all kind of start at the same place. We're spiritually dead at some point and then cross the line of faith. But we still have experiences from our life that can impact that spiritual health and all of that. And just trying to be mindful to not make it sound formulaic. If you just follow these three easy steps, your emotional health will be good, or your mental, or even physical, right?
Yeah.
Like, even for those of us who don't have like genetic things we were born with that make it, like we all have different body types, we all have different metabolisms and just a lot of those things. And that was part of my challenge, was for people who struggle with unique circumstances, not making them feel defeated, because you were saying this earlier, Jim, they're comparing themselves to the person to the right or the left of them.
Yeah, and our world does that really well. And our world elevates physical health, to idolatry, and so there's a huge pitfall as you talk through that. And so how do we, compassionately understand, in grace and truth, speak to that is, it's pretty complex. Think about as well, like one of the things as I was wrestling through the topic was the examples that we have, like family of origin type stuff, even spiritually as well as emotionally and mentally, that influence is massive, right?
Mm-hmm.
As we come into like, okay, how do I be faithful with this? Well, all of us come up against whatever that kind of baggage or influence or history is, let alone genetics and the example that we received or lack thereof. This is massive. It's huge. So it's not about perfect health in any sense, but it is about being faithful with what God has entrusted to us, right? As that being our starting line, knowing it looks very different for each one of us.
You know, one of the things that Jim Putman said, I've heard him say it several times over the years, he used this picture of a laptop and the default screen. And when you turn your computer on, you have that screen, and you can post and place all kinds of pictures that make you feel a certain way when you look at that screen. But it isn't until you actually click past that screen, past maybe those identities, those false images that we place on ourselves to protect ourselves, that we get past that and we engage God, the spiritual, the abiding peace, that it's just imperative that we do that. I don't know how else. I mean, I was telling you guys earlier, one of the texts I used was Matthew 7, when Jesus says, anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. And I would say one of the more challenging things in this whole subject is the discipline to practice, whether it's our spiritual disciplines, our time in the Word, our prayer, our worship, all that stuff, or if it's working out, doing cardio, eating clean diet, all that stuff, or if it's managing, taking our thoughts captive. You know, every one of them, there's an active role that we play in it. It's hard.
Yep. Yeah, and there's a lot in our culture about avoiding hard things, right? And like almost anything worth doing is hard, honestly. And that was part of my discussion in this was apparently to Peter and James, who both wrote about trials and the hard, like they thought it was good that we were going through hard. And we have a culture that says avoid hard at any cost. And yet as believers, like we're supposed to embrace the hard, and that's part of what helps us develop good health, regardless of the type of health that we're talking about.
I think about even with that, as I was reflecting in my own sermon prep, of just how God has grown me and helped me mature a step at a time throughout the years, following Jesus for 25 years. And it has been oftentimes through those hard times. It's very much just what you said. I mean, it's been through the struggle, it's been through the challenge, it's been through him not answering prayers the way I wanted him to, or taking away certain pain points, allowing certain brokenness and struggles to remain, that I've grown in those very things, learned new complexities of how he made us, and to be made in his image and likeness, and the complexities of that, the different elements, and how multifaceted that is. It's been very much a part of my own growth. And so it seems that he's okay with that process. He's okay with that long, slow, hard, not clean way of helping us grow and mature and learn to be faithful stewards.
He's way more okay with it than I am.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
dude.
one of the things that I was I wasn't laughing, but you know, you preach on a subject like this and then you get to try it out yourself. And so last night, I didn't sleep super well. One of the texts I used was 2 Corinthians 5, or 2 Corinthians 10, talking about taking our thoughts captive. And that word captive, it really means like prisoner of war. It's an aggressive, demonstrative action that we take. And I found myself this morning having to get up and read Philippians 4:8, just going back and going, whatever is good, whatever is lovely, whatever is pure, whatever is admirable, whatever is praiseworthy, set my mind in those things. Because in the middle of the night last night, there was a battle going on. And one of the things that I think is important for us is that the devil doesn't want us to be balanced and to holistically be healthy as people. He wants us to be out of balance and off kilter and feeling like a sluggard and depressed and you know, and so there's this battle, and that's just the reality of life on earth. Is like what you said. There's hard in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know for me, one of the things as I was just doing my studying, how interconnected every piece of the health that we talked about is. Like at first I was like, oh, mental health connects to all of these because our brains kind of inform. But then I'm like, but my emotional health connects to all of it, and my physical health they're all just so interconnected. And I find a lot of people will focus a lot on a specific aspect of their health, whether it's physical or spiritual or whatever, and just kind of ignore some of the others, and how unhealthy that is. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about people you know, or people that came up to you and talked to you about that, or even in your own life, examples of that.
Well,
so.
I used the example. I had open heart surgery in June, and I had no idea. So I was leading up to it for about a year. I remember telling you, I just felt really stupid. Like the elevator wasn't going to the top floor. And what I didn't realize physically is that I was not having the right amount of blood and oxygen going to my brain. The result of that is that I started to get very depressed, that I didn't, from an activity perspective, I didn't want to do anything, so I was lethargic. I mean, it impacted everything about me, how I felt, what I was thinking.
Stepping into this. And so it's really intriguing. And then, hearing tons of feedback, from people as well, going, wow, that's so great that you guys spoke, to all these different, complexities. And I haven't thought in those ways in discipleship or my own health. And so it's really good. And it's absolutely been a part of my story. I shared numerous stories about my own physical health and challenges, hurting my back at 30 years old, and then comparing life as a pastor to working in a kitchen on my feet all the time, to my own mental health journey, which is another way of saying struggle, and learning in how powerful thoughts are, but it's inseparable from emotion and spiritually. I mean, I've been on a number of hard rides in my relationship with God, and it has been inseparable to physical health stuff, emotional health stuff, mental health stuff. And so learning those things, learning those truths of taking thoughts captive, learning that just because I think something doesn't, or feel something, doesn't mean that it's true. That's massive. And so just because I think something doesn't mean it's even from me. Just because there's a thought that's in my head doesn't mean that it's necessarily from me or that it's true. It is real that I'm thinking it and feeling it, or that it's there, but just because that's the case doesn't mean that it is true and truth. So we get a base, we get a test, right? Those test the spirit, to test those thoughts against what is true and right and good, which always comes back to God. It always comes back to it bringing, walking in the light and being in community, in view of God and God's truth. It's an amazing journey, and He's good in that. He's good in that, and He's been good to me in that, in the midst of the struggle and the confusion and doubt and fuzziness, and it's quite a ride.
Yeah, my wife and I, when we're talking to people, oftentimes about their relational health, we ask the question, well, what do you feel about this relationship or this struggle or this conflict or whatever, and what do you think about it? And then we go, but what do you know about it? Just what you were just saying. Like, what I think about a situation, I got there for a reason, but then when I have to examine what do I actually know about the other person, the situation, what they're thinking, it's oftentimes very little, even though I have lots of thoughts and oftentimes lots of feelings about a situation or a person.
Yeah. Something I think that's just so powerful in this conversation is, what we know. I know that I'm not alone in my own thoughts and feelings and struggles or challenges. And even looking at the word, I know Moses himself struggled, and he got to the place of going, God, just take me. I want to be with you. Let alone Elijah. Let alone, I think it's in, is it 1 Thessalonians? Paul said, my brothers, he says this. He says, I did not want you guys to be unaware of the struggles we had in Asia, that we were so suffering and struggling, we were despairing of life itself.
Right.
He makes a point to put that on their, in their knowledge, right? In their awareness. I did not want you to know, or to not know, that we were struggling this much. But he says God used it. God used it for the advancement of his purposes. Which he does, which I also love how the Psalms, right? All of the emotions are within the Psalms, and you have all ranges of life and experience of relationships and God and those challenges, and every time when you see those struggles that they're the author's honest about what those emotions are, mental health status, spiritually, they always come back to.
Yeah, that's good. Because I have a fast metabolism, I've been able to eat fairly freely. I always joke, I love pasta. I'm an Italian, so I love Italian food. And yet, the older you get, all of a sudden things slow down and, you have to make adjustments. But that part has always been pretty easy. Really, the battleground of my mind and my emotions has been probably the hardest area for me at times. It's really easy to recite knowledge and go, I know this, but to actually sit down and go through the process of surrendering, like Paul says in Romans 12:1, offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. It's really easy to read that and go, what does that part of my body look like? But when we tackle a holistic approach and when we unpack the mental and the emotional and the spiritual and the physical, all of a sudden he's saying, I want all of you on the altar. And so that's been a struggle in my life because, I feel things deeply, and sometimes like those emotions can take me into the ditch, and I can assign motives and assume things that I ought not to assume, and that there's a saying that's been probably reiterated and spoken in many different ways, but it says that emotions are great servants but terrible masters. And so when our emotions are in the back seat or on the dashboard as a gauge to inform us that there's something wrong, then when we can ask, why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling, we can now discipline ourselves to discover what is driving that. What's the trigger? Why am I angry? Where does that come from? For me, it's control, right? It's I've made my problem so big and God is so small. And when God is small, the devil loves that, because now all of a sudden I have to take control of my circumstances, and I always mess it up. So.
Yeah, that's good. Definitely affirming the complexities of it all being connected. I'd say a couple things in my journey. I've spent a fair amount of time going through like recovery material and groups and helping lead those things, and so I have a huge advantage in that sense, I'd say, by being pretty introspective and having done a lot of that kind of deep work, soul work, heart work, and stuff like that. So one kind of big thing with that has been unpacking the history piece of it, things that have kind of led me to believe what I've believed, feel the things I feel or not, avoid certain things, elevate certain things. Why am I struggling with these certain things? Because of examples that I've had of what was okay, what was not okay. Those unspoken rules within home and life and growing up and all that stuff. And then the other piece of it has been one of the things in the whole mental health journey for me is I've instituted walking as just a discipline, and it's amazing. What I've realized is it actually has benefited me more emotionally and mentally, and then therefore spiritually, as much as it has physically. And so that has been, I love that. I love even saying that, because it's like, it's a low bar. It's not like pumping iron or whatever and all that stuff, though I get some enjoyment out of that when I do that. I'm not very disciplined at that, but I'm pleased to be able to say and communicate that as well, as there's been a ton of benefit in all these aspects of my life by practicing that. And so when I'm struggling, I go through some of those things. Also, I have an app on my phone that has been a huge tool. Basically, I use this thought analyzing journal, I suppose is what it is. It kind of walks through what are you struggling with, what are the thoughts, and then it helps you identify cognitive distortions. I think there's like 13 of them, of like, hey, are you catastrophizing the situation? You know, it's like, this is horrible. Thinking, you know, am I minimizing the positive? Am I mind reading? Am I maximizing the negative? And other different dysfunctions that we fall into. So it's critical to be able to identify I'm not just accepting my thoughts for whatever they are or feelings, but I'm identifying, no, there's brokenness here. I need to call it what it is. And then it helps me kind of walk through a couple questions. What's another way to think about it? And it's just reframing, a psychological term of thinking a different way. What's another way to think about it? That has been so huge. And God's a part of that. Completely, because I'm going to, what does God say about this situation? What does God say about me? What does God say about this fear, which is a tendency of mine, propensity of mine to easily fall into fear.
Super practical way.
What I was struggling with, and I'd flip it over, and then I would have a couple of scriptures that would combat that struggle.
I love it.
Same thing.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, probably the biggest thing has just been the interconnectedness. My brain tends to compartmentalize, especially problems and challenges. And it took me a long time to figure out how much my level of physical activity impacts my emotional and mental health. I'm not a super emotional person. Have them, obviously, but even my mental health, how much my lack of physical activity will impact my ability to process things well. I don't like working out. Like, I do it, but it's not for even the physical effects, it's for the mental and emotional effects, which obviously plays into spiritual and relational as well. And just that concept of how all of that is interconnected has been so important for me personally. You kind of gave a super practical thing in that app. Maybe today what we'll leave people with is there something that you do or have done, maybe something that's like kind of bottom shelf, like go try this thing this week, that if you do this, it might help this area of your life and help steward good health. And I knew I was going to tee up that question, so I'll start. But one of the things that I was challenged with years ago was just the concept of gratitude and how much that helps our perspective. And of course, when I'm talking about gratitude, I'm giving my gratitude to God. And so nearly every single night since I made a decision to do that, I review the day and I try to remember, or I try to go, what are at least 3 things that I can thank God for in my day? And sometimes it's super easy, like I can think of a bunch. Sometimes I'm going, God, I'm having a hard time thinking of one thing that I'm thankful for today. And then I've got to revert back to what I know.
Yeah.
God, you are faithful, you're working, you breathed life into me, I've got the promise of eternal life, and that just helps get that going for me. But if I don't do that, my mind tends to go about tomorrow and my worries for tomorrow.
Yep.
And it's just like 9 times out of 10, it's how I fall asleep, is just
I love that. That's really
just a
it's-
heart of
it's
gratitude,
convicting.
and it just I'm like, what a great way to be able to close out the day.
That's so cool. I love
Yeah.
that, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It makes me think of one of the best books that I've read on this topic is Winning the War on Your Mind by Craig Groeschel, and I know we've done a series on it before. He talks about this example of comparing hummingbirds to vultures. And he talks about how both of them can smell miles away what their target destination is, right? In the case of a vulture, dead things. In the case of hummingbirds, sweet things. They can sense, right, miles apart, and they both find what they're looking for by what they focus on. So it just makes me think of that. I love that. I love that practice.
Interesting.
I'd have to say, just kind of, just like a simple encouragement would be not trying to project what's worked for me, but like take a walk, and man, make it small. It could be 5 minutes. Have a conversation, whatever that looks like. If that's with someone, if that's a conversation with the Lord, if that's writing a passage on a 3x5 card, which is something that I do as well on different times. But take a walk. There's so much research behind the gratitude piece of it and how it helps you. There's so much research in the interlateral stimulation of your left brain, right brain with walking, and how that helps you process. It's what EMDR does, and that mode. In just kind of helping you process through life and feelings. I'd encourage you to take a walk. Take a 5-minute walk. Take a 15-minute walk, let alone the fresh air and all that stuff.
Yeah.
There's, anyways, ton of research and support and how beneficial it is, but on so many fronts, that'd be a small thing. That's it.
Yeah, I think the abiding component of this, as much as everybody's like, oh, abiding to me, I mean, like, all of this stuff is great, but if we are not connected in the vine,
That's right.
then apart from Christ, we can do nothing, right?
Yeah.
And so when I look at it, something really simple again is just spending time before God, positioning ourselves before God in His Word. And that being in His Word can be praying Scripture, it can be meditating on Scripture, it can be reading Scripture, but it's again putting truth in us that gives us perspective so that we aren't behind the ball emotionally or mentally. And I don't, even if you feel like you woke up late and you're on the run, I mean, if you just take a moment and pray through a simple, like, I have go-to passages that I will go to and just pray through and think on. Like, I'll take something before I get in my truck and I'll meditate on it. Just fill yourself with who God is. Fill yourself, your mind, your heart, your soul with truth. I just, there's no way that we can become healthier if we're not focused on Him.
That's right.
And that looks unique to all of us.
Yeah, we all have one life to steward, and our health is part of what we steward. And my prayer is that all of us would just do our best in that, knowing that we won't be perfect, but that we want to honor God with everything that He's given us.